You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's begin with the top headlines making news around the world. President Donald Trump says Washington is ending talks with Tehran as the dispute over Hormuz continues. Syria confirms that several tons of nuclear material is found in the country after a visit by UN inspectors. And the Meta's trial begins. The Facebook owner denies claims that it addicted children to its platforms. President Donald Trump says Washington is ending talks with Tehran as the dispute over control of the Strait of Hormuz continues. Donald Trump says that no conversations are taking place and that the U.S. naval blockade of the strait remains in full force. Iran says the U.S. is now begging to negotiate on Tehran's terms.
U.S. President Donald Trump says no talks were taking place with Iran and insisted the Strait of Hormuz was open, contradicting Iran's assertion that it remained shut. Shipping through the strait slowed, according to data on Wednesday, as most ship owners avoided the key waterway. Just 6 commodity vessels crossed the strait on Tuesday, down from 9 the previous day. The United States says it's patrolling the strait with naval forces. Shipping data from KPILA shows that more than 80% of vessels using the waterway over the past 2 weeks have taken the Omani route, which Tehran strongly opposes. Iran has attacked dozens of ships attempting to use that route. The United Arab Emirates Defense Ministry said on Tuesday that it had detected 2 ballistic missiles launched from Iran. It's the first such incident reported since a 4th of May strike on the Fujairah port. In a statement later, the ministry said the missiles targeted maritime traffic that fell into the sea. However, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai rejected the statement by the UAE, describing it as baseless. U.S. officials say oil shipments through and around the strait reached about 15 million barrels per day last week, compared with a pre-war average of 20 million. Trump has claimed total control of the waterway, but continued Iranian attacks and lower oil flows raise questions over that assertion. Iranian officials have mocked Trump's claim, saying Washington has failed to reopen the strait after he described it as new U.S. territory.
Iran's chief negotiator says that Tehran is standing firm on its position that the U.S. naval blockade must be lifted ahead of any deal. Turaj Shiralilo has the latest from Tehran.
Iran's parliament speaker says Tehran will keep the Strait of Hormuz closed to maritime traffic until the United States fulfills commitments outlined in a memorandum of understanding reached during ceasefire talks in Islamabad in June. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led Iran's delegation in the U.S.-Iran negotiations in Pakistan, told Parliament that the strategic waterway would remain closed unless Washington unfreezes Iranian assets and lifts restrictions on Iranian oil exports, which Tehran says were part of the interim agreement that expired on Monday. In a post on X, Ghalibaf also rejected the possibility of Iran making additional concessions under U.S. pressure. He said recent comments by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth about imposing conditions on Iran were not consistent with the terms agreed in Islamabad. The comments come amid statements from Iranian civilian and military officials indicating that Tehran could shift from a defensive to a more offensive military posture if what it describes as a naval blockade of its southern ports in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is not lifted. Turaj Shiralilo from Tehran for A News.
The United Arab Emirates says it has stopped trading with Iran until further notice. The decision follows the defense ministry's announcement that 2 Iranian ballistic missiles had been detected while targeting its territory.
All trade, commercial exchanges, and financial transactions with Iran have been halted by the United Arab Emirates. That's according to Afra Al-Hamali, director of the UAE Foreign Ministry's Strategic Communications Department. She confirmed the move in a social media post and said it was prompted by developments that undermine regional and international peace and security. The announcement comes after the UAE said its air defense systems detected 2 ballistic missiles launched from Iran towards the country on Tuesday. Officials said the missiles were targeting maritime traffic. One fell outside UAE territorial waters, while the other came down inside them. No casualties or damage have been reported. Iran rejects the UAE's account. On Wednesday, Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Bagay called the allegations baseless and said Abu Dhabi's actions went against good neighborly relations and efforts to build trust in the region. The UAE had also recently accused Iran of attacking vessels operated by state energy firm ADNOC while they were traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran has not claimed responsibility for those incidents. The UAE still reaffirmed its support for dialogue, cooperation, and regional integration.
Meanwhile, Iran has warned Gulf states against helping the U.S. military amid rising regional tensions. Iran's chief of staff says U.S. military activity at bases across the region is being closely watched. In a social media post on X, Major General Ali Abdullahi pointed to a large number of American aircraft, particularly refueling tankers that had been spotted. Abdullahi said their presence was unlikely without the knowledge of host countries. He has warned that any assistance or facilitation for the U.S. military would be considered participation alongside American forces. Several tons of nuclear material has been found at an undisclosed site in Syria, according to the country's foreign ministry. The discovery was made last month after visits by inspectors of the UN Atomic Agency watchdog, the IAEA. Syria's Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani said the material was not considered to be dangerous and would stay in the custody of the Syrian authorities. The watchdog's chief Rafael Grossi said the agency was able to access the site after being notified by the Syrian government. Syria is not known to hold operational stockpiles of nuclear material for weapons use, but Israel bombed a suspected Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007 in the country's eastern province of Deir al-Zor. Meanwhile, Turkey has strongly condemned an Israeli strike on a military airbase in northwestern Syria, calling it a violation of Syrian sovereignty. The incident early on Tuesday has raised concerns over a wider confrontation involving the 3 countries at a time when Washington is seeking a de-escalation of tensions among its partners in the region. Adam Moro reports from Istanbul.
Turkey has condemned in the strongest possible terms an Israeli attack on the Abu el-Duhur military airbase in northwestern Syria near the Turkish border. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said the airstrikes had violated Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, accusing Israel of staging repeated attacks on Syrian infrastructure and military facilities. Ankara did not say whether Turkish troops had been deployed at the airbase at the time of the attack, which reportedly damaged a runway but didn't cause any casualties. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said Syria had been on the verge of violating what it described as a security status quo agreed to with Israel by letting Turkish forces deploy at the airbase. The dispute highlights growing tensions between Israel and Turkey in the Syrian theater, following the fall of the Bashar al-Assad government in late 2024. Since Assad's departure, Ankara has expanded its political and military cooperation with Syria's new leadership and has been involved in efforts to train and rebuild the country's security forces. The United States has also criticized the Israeli strike on the airbase. Tom Barak, Washington's ambassador to Turkey and its special envoy for Syria, described the attack as unnecessary. He also said the United States was working to set up what he described as a deconfliction mechanism between Turkey, Israel, and Syria. According to Barak, Ankara was not warned in advance about the impending Israeli attack near its southern border. Meanwhile, Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani urged Israel to reconsider its approach towards Syria, saying it was now confronting not only Damascus, but also Syria's allies. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Syria's Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani is due in Islamabad today for a 2-day visit. It will be the first visit by a Syrian foreign minister since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Syria's new leadership is looking to deepen ties with Pakistan. Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani arrives in Islamabad on Wednesday for a 2-day visit. Al-Shaybani is expected to meet Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, as well as country's defense and commerce ministers. The talks are expected to focus on defense cooperation, economic ties, and regional security, including developments in Syria and the wider Middle East. The visit will be first by a Syrian foreign minister to Pakistan since Bashar al-Assad was ousted in December 2024. The previous visit by a Syrian foreign minister took place in May 2007. Pakistan and Syria have maintained political and military ties for decades, including military training exchanges. Islamabad also kept its embassy in Damascus open throughout the Syrian conflict and maintained diplomatic representation after Assad's removal. However, the two countries currently lack a formal framework for broad cooperation. The visit comes as Damascus seeks to expand its regional partnerships and Islamabad looks to build on its long-standing ties with Syria amid major political and security changes in the Middle East. Mariam Sia, A News, Islamabad.
U.S. President Donald Trump has delayed the planned 50% tariff regime on Canadian imports for 3 days, giving the two sides more time to finalize a trade deal. The pause comes after Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke twice by phone over the past 2 days. Carney says there is still important work to be done, despite substantial progress being made. It's reported that the two countries traded around $880 billion in goods and services last year. Meta is facing trial in the U.S. over allegations that its products have caused harm to children. A coalition of 29 U.S. states has accused the social media giant of violating consumer protection laws. The case looks set to be the biggest legal test yet of social media's impact on children. Ira Spitzer reports from California.
This landmark trial has now kicked off at this courtroom in Oakland, California, and we heard opening arguments both from this consortium of U.S. states as well as from attorneys for Meta. And the main issue here, the focus of the state's argument, is that they say that the way that Meta designed its platforms, Facebook and Instagram, was done to hook children, to make children and teens addicted to these platforms, and that the company continued to do this despite knowing about the harms that its platforms were doing to young users. So California's Deputy Attorney General laying out some pretty strong accusations in her opening remarks. And we also, of course, heard from Meta's lawyers, and they said that the state's claims here are unsubstantiated and pointed to industry-wide challenges such as age verification, and said that they're in essence being unfairly singled out. But this is a case with major implications. The states are asking for damages of up to $200 billion. That would be equal to several years of Meta's profits. The company is worth more than $1 trillion, but we've really seen a groundswell of activity in the last couple of years here in the U.S. with potential legal liability for Meta over this alleged harm to younger users. We've seen judgments against Meta in the past, although the company has said it plans to appeal those verdicts. But certainly the stakes here are incredibly high. This is really seen as the tip of the iceberg, with thousands of similar lawsuits being prepared around the U.S. And again, really focusing on the design of the products and what Meta knew and when they knew it about what these products might have been doing to younger users. So we're expecting to hear from Meta executives, including Meta's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, as well as Instagram CEO, Adam Mosseri, over the next 6 to 8 weeks. That's about how long this trial is expected to last. And again, with Meta, this could not only result in potential monetary damages, but also could be just increase the pressure on the company and on U.S. lawmakers and regulators to potentially take more action as far as regulating the alleged effects on younger users. Ira Spitzer for A News in Oakland, California.
After the break, Ukraine's Zelensky comes under attack as his sacked former defense minister calls for presidential elections. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Several Ukrainian cities have come under overnight Russian drone strikes with casualties reported in Kherson and Zaporizhia. Russia, meanwhile, says its air defenses intercepted a large number of Ukrainian drones across multiple regions.
4 people were killed and 4 others injured after a Russian drone struck a fixed-route minibus in Kherson. That's according to Ukrainian authorities. Kherson governor said the injured passengers were all women and were taken to hospital. Ukrainian prosecutors say they've opened a war crimes investigation into the attack. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 65 drones overnight, including Shahed and other types of UAVs. Ukrainian forces said they destroyed or jammed 58 aerial targets. Separately, Russian drone strikes on the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia killed 1 person and injured 7 others overnight, according to Ukraine's State Emergency Service. The strike sparked a fire on the 2nd floor of a hostel, where rescuers recovered 1 body from the rubble. A furniture store was also set ablaze, while a nearby apartment building sustained damage, including shattered windows and a damaged roof. Meanwhile, Russian authorities reported hundreds of Ukrainian drones were intercepted overnight across several regions. Drone activity was also reported near Dzержinsk, where local media said explosions and smoke were seen near the Sverdlov explosives plant. Russia's defense ministry also said a cargo vessel carrying military supplies was struck in the Black Sea near Odessa.
Ukraine's political leadership is facing a fresh challenge. The ousted defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov is calling for presidential elections, despite the ongoing war. His remarks has put renewed focus on Ukraine's democratic process, which with elections suspended under martial law since Russia's full-scale invasion.
Ukraine's recently dismissed former defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov has called for a wartime presidential election in the most direct political challenge to Volodymyr Zelensky. It's despite elections being suspended in the country since martial law was imposed at the start of the full-scale invasion by Russia in 2022. He said that Ukraine had to restore a full democratic process even amid a prolonged war, in a video address released online late Tuesday evening.
Democracy cannot be held hostage by Russia. We must find a lawful, safe and realistic mechanism that would allow Ukraine to restore a fully functioning democratic process, even under conditions of a long war. We are facing a systemic governance crisis. The old system lives by its own rules too often. It protects itself, fears change, makes decisions slowly, and may punish the initiative while rewarding loyalty.
Hours earlier, Zelensky confirmed he had asked Parliament to confirm Yevhen Kamara as the new defense minister, effectively closing the door on a Fedorov comeback. Last month, Fedorov was unexpectedly fired from his role, just 6 months after his appointment. He was suddenly dropped by Zelensky in a government reshuffle after a falling out with military commander General Oleksandr Syrsky. Street protests followed, leading to the sacking of Syrsky, but there was no sign Fedorov would be reinstated. Fedorov's call is the first such demand by a major Ukrainian political figure since the war began. The president's office has yet to issue a statement on Fedorov's latest remarks. Zelensky's term ended in May 2024, but the country has postponed its presidential election due to continuing martial law.
In Russia, a major wild berries warehouse near Moscow has again come under attack by Ukrainian drones. Ukraine says its strikes are aimed at disrupting Russia's military supply and logistics networks. Here is more.
Ukraine is taking aim at one of Russia's biggest commercial networks and says it has a military role. Kiev accuses Wildberries of handling dual-use goods and military-related equipment, including drone components and other technical products. Ukraine says disrupting the company's logistics network can interfere with supplies supporting Russia's war effort. Those claims have not been independently verified. Wildberries and Russian authorities reject them. Wildberries is Russia's largest online retailer. It says it processes around 20 million orders every day, with warehouses covering about 3 million square meters. Its network connects hundreds of thousands of sellers with consumers across Russia. Since the 18th of July, more than 20 Wildberries warehouses have been targeted across Russia, with attacks reaching as far east as Yekaterinburg, more than 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. A major strike on the 3rd of August caused a fire covering around 100,000 square meters at a Wildberries warehouse in the Vladimir region. More than 200 firefighters were deployed, while deliveries were redirected. Reuters reported that nearly 30% of the company's warehouse space had been destroyed, with losses estimated at between $2 and $4 billion. The Associated Press later reported estimates as high as $6 billion. The disruption has also put pressure on businesses and lenders. Russia's central bank has asked banks to help restructure loans for small and medium-sized businesses affected by attacks on logistics centres. Wildberries is now reorganising its logistics network and using alternative facilities to keep deliveries moving.
To discuss Kiev's changing tactics in the war, we're joined by Pascal de Lima, Chief Economist at Business Knowledge Management Consulting, speaking to us from Paris, France. Pascal, welcome to the program and thank you very much for joining us. So, Ukraine says some Wildberries facilities are being used to supply components for Russian military drones. What is the evidence, and if true, how significant a part could Wildberries be in Russia's defense industry?
Wildberries is not officially a defense manufacturer. Its importance comes from the scale of its logistical network, of course, which can distribute both civilian and dual-use goods throughout Russia. In a wartime economy, products such as electronics, batteries, cameras, or drone components can serve civilian as well as military purpose. So Wildberries may therefore support the wider war economy through logistics rather than weapons production, I think.
Pascal, what kind of economic damage can repeated attacks on major warehouses cause, not only to Wildberries, but also to thousands of Russian businesses that depend on its logistics network?
Well, the damage appears to be significant. Reuters, for example, estimated that more than 1/5 of Wildberries' capacity has been damaged or destroyed by early August. But the cost goes beyond the buildings themselves, as you say. It includes destroyed goods, interrupt operations, delayed deliveries, or lost sales. So the disruption also affects thousands of smaller businesses using the platform.
Mr. De Lima, could these attacks disrupt consumer prices, deliveries, and retail activity across Russia? Or is the impact likely to remain relatively limited?
For consumers, the immediate effects are delivery delays and reduced availability and potentially higher prices. For some retailers, the consequences can be much more serious because many depend heavily on Wildberries to reach customers. Some businesses have already reported sharp falls in sales. If this disruption continues, they could lead to bankruptcy, job losses, and weaker consumer confidence. Course.
So we've seen reports that Wildberries is looking for alternative warehouse capacity outside Russia, including in neighboring countries. Could this accelerate the relocation of Russian logistics networks abroad?
Well, one Wars attack will not stop Russia war effort, of course, but what we could say is that, that there is a clear escalation risk. Russia could intensify its Ukrainian energy, transport, commercial infrastructure. It could also respond throughout cyber attacks, sabotage, or economic pressure against countries supporting Ukraine, etc., etc. But there are some alternatives. Security costs, as you said, will rise through surveillance systems, physical protection, insurance, and the duplication of warehouse capacity. But companies may also need to hold larger inventories and use longer or more complex supply routes. And the decentralized network is harder to destroy, but it is also more expensive to operate. So these additional costs will eventually be shared between companies, the state, and consumers.
Mr. De Lima, from an economic perspective, what is more important here, the physical destruction of goods and warehouses or the psychological effect of making major Russian companies feel vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks?
Yes, I think the psychological impact is important because businesses located far inside Russia can no longer assume that they are protected by distance. So companies must now include drone attacks in their risk assessments and investment decisions. Some may postpone investment, decentralize their warehouses, or seek state guarantees. So the war is becoming a direct business risk rather than a distant geopolitical event.
So in your view, could a sustained attacks on logistics hubs force Russian companies to spend significantly more on security, insurance, air defense, and alternative supply routes?
Yes, of course. How to say? The most important part, I think, is that Ukraine says that some Walberries warehouse were being used to distribute drone components. So we are thinking about security, about alternative, but these securities, these new securities with this new event and these are all the alternative cost a lot of money too, and a lot of time too. So it's not clear that we'll find alternatives, very strict and rigorous alternative with a lot of controls.
Mr. De Lima, could attacks on companies such as Wildberries put pressure on the Kremlin by increasing the economic costs of continuing the war? Or is Russia's economy large enough to absorb these losses?
There is two questions, I think. The first one is that, of course, although the effect is cumulative rather than immediate, Russia must finance military expenditure, while also protecting civilian infrastructure and supporting companies affected by the attacks. So supply disruptions can also contribute to inflation and make it more difficult for the central bank to reduce interest rate. Each individual attack may have a limited effect, but repeated attacks create growing economic pressure. And the second question, of course, yes, there is a clear escalation risk, and Russia could intensify its attack on Ukrainian energy, as I said before.
In your view, could Russia respond by intensifying attacks on Ukrainian civilian and commercial infrastructure, creating a cycle of economic retaliation?
Yes, transport and commercial infrastructure too, attacks on Ukrainian energy. It could also respond throughout cyber attacks, as I said before, sometimes sabotage or economic pressure against countries supporting Ukraine. It's the war of political war that we live today and with a lot of countries. And the danger is a broader cycle of retaliation in which an increased number of civilian and dual-use economic facilities are affected.
And finally, looking ahead, if Ukraine continues targeting logistics and industrial infrastructure inside Russia, what could be the broader consequences for the Russian economy and ultimately for Moscow's ability to sustain the war?
I think that for consumers and for Russia, the problem is the gross domestic product because immediate effect are delivery delays, reduced availability, and higher price. So the demand will go down, and of course the gross product too, and it's important for the credibility of the state, and the consequences can be more serious because many depends heavily on wild berries, consumers, enterprises too. So some business have already reported sharp falls in sales, as we said before. So it can continue to diminish the gross domestic product, and the Russian state needs money to do the war, of course.
Pascal de Lima, thank you very much for your time, your analysis, and for joining us. We greatly appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks. Iceland is heading to a key referendum on whether to restart EU membership talks, a decision that could have wider implications for the bloc's future enlargement. The issue of Iceland's membership has been on hold for over a decade. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a referendum in Iceland could have implications far beyond the small Nordic island. Next week, Icelanders vote on whether to restart negotiations to join the EU, talks Reykjavik abandoned more than a decade ago. Iceland is already closely tied to the bloc through the European Economic Area and the Schengen area, but full membership would take that relationship to the next level. The referendum is not a vote on membership itself. Any eventual deal would require a second referendum, and Brussels is watching closely. EU diplomats tell Reuters that bringing a wealthy, modern economy like Iceland into the bloc could make enlargement more attractive to Europeans wary of admitting less prosperous countries. That could provide a political boost for candidates including Montenegro, Albania, Moldova, and Ukraine. Montenegro hopes to join as early as 2028, and some officials believe its progress alongside Iceland could help overcome resistance to further enlargement. Norway is also watching. Its prime minister recently said Iceland's decision should influence Norwegian attitudes towards the bloc. If Iceland eventually joins, Norway and Liechtenstein would be the only EEA countries remaining outside the bloc. But Icelanders are deeply divided. A Gallup poll this month found 46% support restarting negotiations and 46% oppose it, while a majority still opposes EU membership itself. The debate has been revived by rising living costs and a dramatically different geopolitical landscape, including growing tensions in the Arctic involving both Russia and the US. If Iceland votes yes, negotiations could move quickly. EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Koss says talks could take just 1 to 2 years, but one major obstacle remains: fishing. Iceland fiercely protects its fishing industry and control over its waters. But with fisheries representing a relatively small part of the EU economy, Koss signaled Brussels may be willing to compromise. Because for the EU, Iceland's vote could mean something bigger: a chance to inject new momentum into the bloc's wider enlargement project. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
UK inflation has hit its highest level since March. Rising gas and electricity bills were the main driver, with the annual inflation rate reaching 2.9% in July, presenting a challenge for Prime Minister Andy Burnham, who has pledged to make tackling the cost of living a priority for his government.
UK inflation rose to 2.9% in July, as higher household energy bills added to the pressure on household finances. The Office for National Statistics says the annual rate of inflation increased from a 15-month low of 2.6% in June. The rise was in line with economists' forecasts and marks the first increase in the annual inflation rate since March. A key factor was the cost of gas and electricity, after the household energy price cap increased by 13% at the start of July. The jump in energy prices came as global energy markets faced renewed volatility following the conflict involving Iran. The ONS also pointed to other pressures on household spending. Furniture prices fell by less than usual for this time of year, while clothing prices also saw a smaller decline as retailers offered fewer discounts. There was some relief elsewhere in the data. Prices for raw materials and goods leaving factories rose more slowly in July, helped by lower crude oil and refined petroleum prices. Core inflation, which excludes energy and food prices, also rose slightly more than expected, coming in at 2.6%. The figures are likely to be closely watched by the Bank of England as it considers the outlook for inflation, household finances, and interest rates.
Heavy snowfall and freezing temperatures have disrupted life across Bolivia's Andean highlands, closing mountain routes and leaving drivers stranded. Snow has covered parts of at least 5 departments, including La Paz, Potosi, and Oruro, with bus services suspended on some routes. In Potosi, more than 165,000 llamas and sheep are at risk of starvation as grazing land is buried. Authorities have declared an emergency and sent emergency feed to hundreds of families, but blocked roads are hampering relief efforts. A state of catastrophe has been declared in northern Chile following torrential rainfall. Streets have been flooded, homes damaged, and vehicles swept away in the municipality of Tocopilla, one of the hardest hit areas. Mudslides and overflowing rivers have forced people to evacuate from coastal regions to safety. Meanwhile, Chile's National Disaster Prevention Service has issued a red alert for 4 regions, including areas close to the Peruvian and Bolivian borders. Europe's seas are experiencing record-breaking temperatures this summer, with the Mediterranean among the hardest hit. Scientists say climate change is making marine heat waves more frequent and more intense, putting ecosystems at risk.
Human-caused climate change was the main driver of recent record-breaking sea temperatures around Europe. That's according to scientists, after the average temperature last month was around 27 degrees Celsius on the continent. The heat has also continued into August. Near Majorca, an offshore buoy recorded sea temperatures of 33 degrees Celsius earlier this month. A new analysis by the World Weather Attribution Group estimates that climate change has added around 2 degrees of warming to the Mediterranean, and about 1.4 degrees to Western European seas. The study found that the extreme temperatures recorded this year in the eastern and western Mediterranean, along the Bay of Biscay and around the Iberian coast, would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. The consequences are already being felt by marine life. Hotter seas can cause mass die-offs of species such as corals, disrupt food supplies, and affect birds and marine mammals further up the food chain. Marine ecologist John Bruno from the University of North Carolina says some species are moving north in search of cooler waters. But not all species will be able to adapt quickly enough. He says many are now approaching the absolute biological limits of adaptation. The analysis estimates that around 90% of the Bay of Biscay and 80% of the Western Mediterranean have experienced marine heatwave conditions this year. Without global warming, researchers say, that figure would have been closer to 40%.
Now we have a short break. Right after the break, we'll look at more stories shaping the region. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Russia's ambassador to Azerbaijan has been summoned to the foreign ministry after Baku lodged objections to what it calls provocative, insulting and threatening media statements targeting the country and its people. Officials cited the recent broadcasts on Russian TV and radio, including Chistota Ponimania on Sputnik Radio and Spas TV. Baku has urged Moscow to take immediate action. The Russian Foreign Ministry says the comments did not reflect Moscow's official position. It stressed that bilateral relations with Baku should develop in line with the 2022 Declaration on Allied Interaction. Earlier, we spoke to Ülviya Zulfikar, political analyst, on Azerbaijan's growing concerns over Russian media rhetoric, and the international wanted list decision could further strain Baku-Moscow relations and risk a wider diplomatic confrontation.
I think what prompted this reaction was the nature of what was actually being said. We have now reached a point where certain Russian commentators are not merely expressing hostility towards Azerbaijan or disagreeing with its policies. We're talking about statements involving violent actions against Azerbaijan, threats to its constitutional order and territorial integrity, and most seriously, references to the physical targeting and elimination of particular individuals. So for any country, that is a very serious line to cross. And I think we should call what it is. And once someone begins publicly discussing violence, physical elimination, or terrorist matters against another country or its representatives, it becomes very difficult to present this simply as provocative journalism. So these statements were made by people presented to audiences as journalists, experts, or political commentators, and were carried through established media platforms that gives such rhetoric reach legitimacy and an audience. So I think the reaction should be understood in precisely that context. Its message is essentially that violent rhetoric cannot be allowed to become a normal part of the media conversation about Azerbaijan.
The International Labour Organization says Afghanistan's labor market is increasingly dominated by men, with women facing severe exclusion from economic activity. It also warns that returning Afghans and rising living costs are adding pressure on jobs and livelihoods. Tamim Bahis reports.
5 years after the Taliban returned to power, the International Labour Organization says Afghanistan's labour market is becoming increasingly dependent on male employment, while women remain largely shut out of economic activity. According to its latest assessment, total employment has risen by around 14% from its 2022 low, reaching nearly 8.5 million people in 2026. But the organization says that increase has not kept pace with population growth. The employment to population ratio now stands at an estimated 32.5%, more than 4 percentage points below its 2020 level. The gains have also been concentrated entirely among men. Male employment is estimated to be around 22% higher than in 2020, while female employment has fallen sharply. Afghanistan is now estimated to have the second lowest female labour force participation rate in the world. The ILO says the return of large numbers of Afghans from Iran and Pakistan is creating additional pressure, with many arriving in communities already facing poverty, underemployment and limited livelihood opportunities. It also warns that more than 70% of Afghan workers are employed in sectors exposed to rising energy prices and inflation linked to the Middle East crisis. The organization is calling for greater support for private sector development, small businesses and labor-intensive industries, while expanding employment opportunities for women, young people, returnees and other vulnerable groups. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, iNews.
Uzbekistan has announced a new package of measures to make it easier for businesses to access financing, expand their operations and enter foreign markets. The measures include new loan programs, support for exporters and artificial intelligence, as well as a 3-year moratorium on most inspections of small businesses. Our correspondent Sebil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan is introducing new measures to make it easier for entrepreneurs to start, expand and modernize their businesses. Under the new package, businesses will be able to apply online for loans of up to $423,000, while startups can receive collateral-free loans of up to $16,900 through the new Business Start program. For loans of up to $846,000, entrepreneurs will only need made to provide collateral covering 25% of the loan, with the remainder backed by state and banking guarantees. The government will also allocate $100 million to help businesses adopt artificial intelligence, covering half of eligible costs. Exporters will receive further support through a new export navigator system with $1 billion allocated to help companies find foreign buyers, meet international standards, and improve logistics. The measures also include a 3-year moratorium on most inspections of small businesses and an average 50% reduction in financial fines. The government says the package is aimed at helping businesses expand production, attract investment, and become more competitive in international markets. Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
And this concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to A News for more updates.